just a meme that Cliff sent to me, but I think it's really important because he talks about DNA as a fractal antenna, right? Like we're transmitters and receivers, and we're bioelectrical. We're bioelectrical water beings, like with crystalline energy. And so the consciousness that we have is not all just in our head. It's also how we interface with the noosphere, like with the collective intelligence, and being able to be discerning about how we listen and what we're listening to. And I think the signals intelligence people really understand this very well, how they transmit, and then how signals intelligence going from like Morse codes, dots and dashes, to more and more sophisticated encrypted military messaging, then to broadcast media, mass media, that it was about programming a story and a message, and that we have to be very intentional about what we're listening to. Because if you start listening to the wrong thing, you're going to get off track and you're going to start to channel really negative energy, which happens sometimes, right? So if you're channeling this message, part of it is I think we're already naturally resonant with the world, but increasingly they're looking to come up with non-surgical neuroprosthetics, whether through nanoelectronics or nanomachines or self-assembling nanoparticles that can cross the blood-brain barrier and provide an overlay for neural engineering in our brain that will connect us into this larger global brain. So just to mention that when we were in the Salt Lake area, at the University of Utah, they created a research park in the late 1960s, not long after they had the Alta meeting to set up the ARPANET. And they were doing all of this kinds of research. And, by the late 1990s, early 2000s, we're developing neuroprosthetic technologies and BrainGate, but things that are much more refined than I think the typical Neuralink that people are trotting out, in a general way, that it's like a non-surgical intervention is really where they're at now. And that's what James Giordano talks about, the N3 DARPA initiative. A week ago Friday, when I met up with Steffers, like we did a number of site visits around like Lake Carnegie and the Institute for Advanced Study and some of these other places. And then she had to peel off. And so I ended up going over to Grover's Mill, which is the site in New Jersey where the Orson Welles broadcast of War of the Worlds. So they remade the H.G. Wells story into a radio broadcast that made it sound like reality TV. And then I think even though they dropped some clues that it was a play, a radio play, it was confusing for a lot of people. And at that point, like you really only had radios. And so like millions of people around the country thought that aliens had landed in New Jersey and were taking over and like taking out the New Jersey militia. And so they actually have like in the 50th anniversary, they put in a little monument. So I went out there, but on the way there is where the Sarnoff Corporation was. And David Sarnoff was early signals intelligence with Marconi and then RCA, and then later on RKO Pictures and NBC. And so once you start to see the through line of like managed reality and how you can use digital technologies to intervene in reality to create conditions or environments that are more receptive to your goals, it's quite fascinating. And then it turns out like this Sarnoff Corporation was like equidistance between the Institute for Advanced Study and Grover's Mills, although it was put there, I think, in 1940. So that's 2 or 3 years after the Orson Welles broadcast. But I don't know. For me, I find it very interesting geographically how this all comes together. And signals intelligence, I don't know. There's something really important to it. I know I've been looking into, as well as a friend, into the Riverbank Labs and what's his name, Fabian, and the Friedmans, who were the beginning of the NSA and cryptography. And there is some thread within field theory, neural networks, blockchain, transmissions. It's linked, and it's linked across time, because when I found out that Ezra Cornell, who was the co-founder of Cornell University, which always prided itself in innovation, like it was a technological university. I always thought of it as birds. I always think of like Cornell and ornithology or whatever, but actually it was like technology, because Ezra Cornell, he made his money in Western Union and the telegraphs, which we talked about a little bit about the Civil War fort in Utah that they kept trying to bring down the telegraph lines. And he worked with Samuel Morse. And what he was good at was creating a plow that allowed them to put down the cabling. And so that fortune helped build Cornell. Cornell Technion, which is the hub in New York, with Technion, which is like the MIT of Israel. They're the incubator space for the Commons Project, right? The Common Pass. So on the one hand, you have Western Union and Telegraph and finance funding a university that in later generations became a hub for biometric digital Internet of Bodies payment systems. It's this loop, you know?
Real quick on the Orson Welles thing, though, I also did hear that the stories about its effectiveness were exaggerated by the media. So, in terms of how impactful that was, you know, I did see it. I watched a documentary about kind of the stories that came out about that, about all the people committing suicide and all this stuff. That some of that was like media creation. So again, signals, you know, you get into this layers. Yeah, exactly. You have the story and the story about the story and then the story about that story and maybe
which cave are we in?
Right.
How do we get out of this cave?